Hello, welcome to this next Flip preaching video. My name's Andy. We're going to have a look at a brilliant story from the Gospel of Luke. We're following on through Luke through all of this year. So it's Luke 17:11 to 19. It's a story about a healing of 10 people who had leprosy. Now, there's so many different things going on in this story. I just want to pick out a couple of them, but first I want to tell you a little fun fact about the temple. The story starts with Jesus on his way to Jerusalem to go to the temple there and to meet his fate. And in the temple, it was divided into different zones. So you could only, if you were a foreigner, you could only go so far into the temple. Only Jews were allowed into the inner bit, and then only male Jews were allowed into the next bit, and then only priests allowed into the next bit, and so on. There are different levels of hierarchy where different groups were allowed in. And on the barrier, on the divide between the bit where non-Jews were allowed and Jews were allowed, they had written above it in big letters in Greek, "No foreigners allowed." No foreigners allowed. It's the Greek word, I probably pronounced this wrong, allogenes. It's a word that was used in the Old Testament in its Greek translation quite a lot. So it was written in Greek, so the Greek speakers would better understand it. Basically, no foreigners allowed past this point. Okay, so back to the story. Jesus is walking towards Jerusalem and he meets this crowd of 10 people with leprosy. And they ask for mercy. They say, "Jesus, have mercy on me." And he tells them to go to see the priests, which was what the Old Testament Jewish law said that you did if you had leprosy. The priests would decide whether you were clean or not. So they go off, and as they leave, they're healed. Jesus wants to restore people. If you had leprosy, you were an outcast, you were on the edge of society, and Jesus wants people to be restored into community. He wants to end division and people being second-class citizens. But then the twist in the story comes that one of the 10 comes back to say thank you. 9 of them don't, but one of them does come back to say thank you. That's where I got the title for this from, this 90% ungrateful, because only one of the 10 comes back to say thank you, and he falls at Jesus' feet and thanks him. And Jesus says, it's only this man who came back to say thanks, and he is an allogenes, a foreigner. So it's really, really subversive. Jesus is making the hero of this story the man who was excluded from the temple where God was supposed to be. It's totally ironic that you have this system in the temple that people who were foreigners weren't allowed to reach God, because God was thought to dwell in the inner sanctum of the temple, and yet here we go, Jesus, God embodied on earth, and we have this man who's the foreigner is the one who comes back and meets him. So clever, so good. Now there's another level in this which I didn't realise till I started looking into this, but and at the end of it he says, rise up and go, you've been saved. Another level I didn't realise is in the Greek language there are quite a few references which we lose in our English translations. Firstly, when this one man, the Samaritan foreigner leper, came back to Jesus and it says he thanked him, the word there in Greek is Euchariston, a version of the word Eucharist for thanksgiving. And in churches today, when we celebrate Holy Communion together, or the Lord's Supper, or the Eucharist, all different words for the same thing, we've borrowed one of those from this word. The word Eucharist means thanksgiving. So it's got this word Eucharist right in the middle of the story. And at the start, when the lepers, all of them, said, "Jesus, have mercy on me," that was again word for word from the very early church liturgy for the Eucharist. And at the end, where he said, "Rise up, go," that's the same word in the liturgy that we keep today, which said, lift up your hearts, we lift them to the Lord. That's that same word, rising up, lifting up. So there are 3 instances in this story where the early church communion liturgy is kind of woven into it. And that adds another dimension. Perhaps we should think, if you're part of a church and you come to celebrate the sacrament of communion or Eucharist, perhaps it might enrich our understanding of it if we think, okay, we're a bit like lepers asking for mercy, and that the act of giving thanks is what cleanses us and saves us and delivers us. Okay, there's a lot in that about how we view people who are different to us, about the breadth of God's restoration, and about seeing how we meet God through thanksgiving. Wonderful, wonderful story. I wonder what you think about it. Okay, thank you for watching. See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.